Hello and welcome to Indus News with me, Usman Lone. Well, we begin this hour with our top story, and that's the Taliban claim they've killed 30 government forces in an attack on a district police headquarters in northwestern Balkh province. Balkh police spokesman Munir Ahmed Farhad said several others were wounded. Farhad also said that the Taliban suffered casualties during the clash, but the members have not been confirmed. He claimed that reinforcements have arrived in the area and the district is currently under Afghan forces' control. Taliban spokesman Zabiullah also claimed to have captured 10 Afghan soldiers and destroyed armoured vehicles in the attack. Now, Turkey says it will continue on its own path to establish the Syria safe zone after its deadline to the United States expired. President Erdogan was speaking at the parliament's opening ceremony and said Turkey intends to settle 2 million refugees inside the safe zone. President Erdogan said Turkey has not achieved the desired results of the talks with the United States. He went on to say that Turkey can't lose even a single day and will act on its own. He said Turkey has calculated the costs of settling the refugees and is aiming to host an international donors meeting for its plans in Syria. Well, North Korea and the US have agreed to resume their working-level nuclear talks. Pyongyang's first Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ko Son-hui, says the dialogue will start on October the 5th. In a statement, Ms. Hui said the two countries will hold preliminary contact on the 4th of October. She expressed optimism over the outcome of the meeting, but did not say where it would take place. South Korea has welcomed the proposed resumption of dialogue between the two countries. Seoul said it hopes the two sides will make practical progress on the complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. Well, as the crisis in Kashmir continues in India, the Supreme Court has given the Indian government just 5 weeks to submit its reply to petitions challenging the annexation of occupied Kashmir. The court adjourned the hearing until November the 14th. The bench also took up petitions against New Delhi's clampdown, communications blackout and lack of basic facilities. On Monday, the top court denied the release of Farooq Abdullah, the former chief minister of the occupied valley. The court said Abdullah was detained under the controversial Public Safety Act that cannot be challenged. On the 5th of August, the Indian government illegally revoked Article 370, stripping the valley of its special status. Now, as winter looms, Indian troops are forcing the residents of occupied Kashmir to rent out their homes to occupation forces. Locals say they're harassed and threatened with violence if they refuse to vacate their houses immediately. They said multiple families are being crammed into one house to create boarding for Indian troops. New Delhi's curfew and communications blackout in the valley has entered its 58th day. Over 1 million troops have been deployed in the occupied valley to crush dissent over India's illegal annexation. Meanwhile, Indian authorities are all set to file charges against pro-freedom leaders Yasin Malik and Asiya Andrabi. Lawyers said a charge sheet under the controversial Public Safety Act will be filed before the 15th of October. Now, China is celebrating 70 years of Communist Party rule by holding its largest ever military parade in Beijing. The culture and military might of the state were displayed in the parade, while mass celebrations are still underway across the country. More in this report.
As the parade progressed, floats carrying performers in their traditional attire created a colorful spectacle. The lavish celebrations also included massive fireworks that lit up Beijing's sky. Beijing also flaunted its newest technology, including the intercontinental ballistic missile and hypersonic glider launcher.
I come from Hong Kong and I am close to 70 years old now. For me, it is hard to come to Beijing. We should band together in a harmonious society for a better future.
Speaking at the march, President Xi Jinping said China will stay on the path of peaceful development. He said the country's military will safeguard its sovereignty and interests and that no force can stop China and its people from emerging.
Today, a socialist China stands proudly in the east. There is no power that can shake our great motherland's position. There is no power that can stop the progress of the People's Republic of China and the people of China.
President Xi also said the Chinese must work to strengthen their country.
Moving forward, we must uphold a peaceful one country, two systems principle, safeguard Hong Kong and Macau's prosperity and stability, and promote a peaceful development of cross-strait relations.
In a unique display of muscle, 15,000 troops, along with latest artillery and drones, were paraded down the Avenue of Eternal Peace in Beijing. After the military parade, around 100,000 ordinary Chinese citizens took part in a separate march which featured 36 formations.
Well, the US has imposed sanctions on a number of Russian nationals for their alleged attempts to influence the 2018 US midterm elections. The sanctions target the physical assets of Russia's Internet Research Agency and 6 of its employees. In a statement, the Treasury Department said it will punish anyone trying to undermine the US democratic process by illegally influencing voters. Moscow responded to the sanctions, saying the curbs reflect the domestic policy crisis currently raging in the US. In a statement, the Foreign Ministry said Washington uses Moscow as an instrument to reach its own opportunistic goals. Now, French President Emmanuel Macron has advocated Russia's presence in the Council of Europe despite its annexation of Crimea. The Council is the guardian of the European Convention on Human Rights and the creator of the European Court in Strasbourg. President Macron said Russian citizens should be allowed to defend their rights at the European Court. The Council of Europe has allowed Russia to start voting again after its rights were suspended just 5 years ago. Supported by France and Germany, the decision is a diplomatic boost for Russia. Well, staying with the French president, and he's called on the US to remove Sudan from its list of state sponsors of terrorism. Speaking at a joint press conference with Sudan's Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok, President Macron offered to host an international conference on Khartoum's debt. He said this can happen after the US lifts its sanctions. Last week at the United Nations, Hamdok said he wanted an agreement with the US to remove his country from the blacklist. Sudan was named a state sponsor of terror in 1993 under the then US President Bill Clinton. Khartoum has been unable to tap the IMF and World Bank for support because of the designation. The Republic of Ireland has dismissed Britain's proposal to set up customs clearance centres on both sides of the Irish border after Brexit. Foreign Minister Simon Coveney dismissed the idea as a non-starter. Referring to proposals submitted by London during recent EU discussions, Coveney said Ireland deserves better. The Irish national broadcaster said the proposals included posts on either side of the dividing line. The Irish government says it has yet to see any credible alternatives towards the backstop. Well, an Iranian court has sentenced the brother of President Hassan Rouhani to 5 years in prison. The president's supporters alleged the case was politically motivated. Judiciary spokesman Ghulam Hossein Ismaili said Freidoun may face further charges in another case. Earlier, the court sentenced one person to death for spying for the United States and jailed 2 others for 10 years for the same crime. A 4th person has also been sentenced for 10 years over charges of spying for Britain. Ismaili said the ruling has been challenged in a higher court by the accused. Well, in Jakarta, more demonstrations are scheduled today after clashes that claimed a student's life, injuring 300 others last week. Yesterday, students took to the streets of Jakarta to oppose a new law limiting the powers of the state anti-corruption agency. On Monday, authorities blocked streets leading to the parliament in Jakarta, where 560 members were present. Indonesia's President Joko Widodo has so far refrained from commenting on the situation, but is facing criticism from lawmakers. Well, we'll be back with more news from around the world after this short break. Hello and welcome back to Indus News with me, Usman Lone. Now, hundreds of asylum seekers are protesting over poor condition at Greece's biggest migrant camp on Lesbos Island. The death of a migrant woman in a fire at Moria camp triggered the protests. Over 12,000 people live in Moria camp, and it's become Lesbos' island's 2nd largest town in just 3 years. Most of the refugees are from Syria, Afghanistan and Iraq. Protesters said they should be given security and freedom. Riot police prevented them from marching past the camp's gates. Moria camp opened in 2015 as a centre to register new arrivals, but it now houses asylum seekers 4 times its capacity. The European Union struck a deal with Turkey in 2016 to cut off migrant flows to Greece. As a result, asylum seekers are barred from leaving the Greek island camps until their process is completed. Well, in Peru, parliamentary unrest and mass protests have erupted following the dissolution of Congress. Earlier, President Martin Vizcarra dissolved the legislature to end a year-long battle with right-wing lawmakers over his anti-graft campaign. Following the dissolution, rebel legislators have refused to leave the chamber. Protests have started across the country as demonstrators gathered outside Congress to pressure members to leave. Local media has reported similar protests in multiple cities supporting the president's anti-corruption drive against the opposition. Earlier, in a televised address, Vizcarra said the constitution permitted his decision and fresh elections are necessary to tackle graft. Now in India, 21 people returning from a pilgrimage have died in a bus accident. Another 35 people have been injured. Police say the bus carrying 70 passengers overturned at high speed in the western state of Gujarat. It said heavy rain and high winds are making rescue operations extremely difficult. This is the worst bus accident in Gujarat since February 2016, when 37 people were killed after their bus plunged off a bridge. Now in Pakistan, 8 people have been killed in the country's northern Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. Rescue officials say 5 people died and 4 were wounded after a roof collapsed in a house in Mardan. They said 3 children were swept away by flash floods in the same city. Provincial authorities said rains have also caused extensive damage to property and crops in the region. In Finland, a man stabbed a student to death and wounded 10 others at a school in the eastern city of Kuopio. Police have arrested the suspected attacker, who was among those injured. Police did not provide details on the motive behind the incident. 18 people were killed in 2 school attacks in the country over the last 12 years. Both attacks were carried out by students who committed suicide straight afterwards. In Hong Kong, clashes have resumed after police fired tear gas and pepper spray to break up protesters. Officials said the metro operator shut down about 20 stations in protesting areas. Despite the ban on demonstrations, thousands of protesters gathered at different points around the city. Today's rally marks the 17th consecutive weekend of anti-government protests since June. Now, a 600 square mile iceberg in Antarctica called D28 has just broken off the main ice shelf. Scientists say the event is part of a normal cycle and not related to climate change. According to American glaciologist Helen Amanda Fricker, the berg measured 1,582 square kilometers. It was about 210 meters thick. Scientists say the figures are huge, but iceberg production is part of the normal cycle of ice shelves. According to the Scripps Institution of Oceanography at the University of California, the ice mass remains constant and will be offset by more snow. Now, Austria's President van der Bellen says the country's next government will have to address the global climate crisis. President Bellen said the government must trust after a corruption scandal brought down the previous administration. President Alexander van der Bellen is likely to task Conservative leader Sebastian Kurz with forming a coalition. Kurz's People Party won Sunday's elections, and on Tuesday President van der Bellen discharged an interim government led by Chancellor Brigitte Bierlein. But he asked its members to remain in their posts until a new government is formed. Now, climbers brave heights relying on their body balance, precision of movement and their equipment. But this one French climber, Alain Robert, is different. He's just scaled a 39-story Frankfurt skyscraper on his own without any equipment or ropes. More in this report.
The French Spider-Man, the 57-year-old is famous or notorious for climbing 165 of the world's tallest buildings with his bare hands. He says his mind is the best kind of safety net for such feats. Robert often climbs without permission and has been arrested more than 120 times.
The good thing is once I start climbing, I know I can put my fear aside, meaning I am focused on my target. I'm not really thinking about anything negative. I'm just thinking about climbing, about to save my ass.
He has the dubious honor of being named the world's most arrested man by Guinness World Records. But he says his stunts give people doing the dull office jobs inside the buildings he climbs something to laugh about.
The message would be, you know, instead of surviving, try to live. You know, my philosophy is very simple. It's to realize my dreams and not just to dream my life.
Robert began climbing as a schoolboy. Since then, he's clambered up cliffs, mountains and landmarks. These include Dubai's Burj Khalifa, the Eiffel Tower, San Francisco's Golden Gate Bridge and the New York Times building.
I am Alain Robert. I am the French Spider-Man.
Well, I can just about climb my stairs at home, let alone a skyscraper. Well done, Mr. Robert. Now, in other news, an exhibit in Moscow is commemorating the birth anniversary of legendary weapons designer Mikhail Kalashnikov, the creator of the world-famous AK-47 assault rifle. The rifle is also the weapon of choice for guerrillas worldwide, equating the gun's image with conflict and terrorism. But for Russians, it's a symbol of the country's proud military past. More in this report.
With over 100 million AK-47s sold worldwide, the Kalashnikov is one of Russia's most recognizable exports. It is also a staple of early military education in Russia and used by 50 armies. The Russians also consider the gun's creator, Mikhail Kalashnikov, a national hero.
He created many weapons which have been spread around the entire world, but that's not Mikhail Kalashnikov's fault. The fact that they spread all over the world and that you can see AK-47s everywhere, even in the terrorist, that is not his fault. That is the fault of politicians.
In his twilight years, Kalashnikov publicly stated he was tormented by the fact that his invention has caused so many deaths.
He was a quiet man who was of very short stature. He was very modest. He had great self-restraint. He was a very wise man.
Mikhail Kalashnikov died in December 2013 at the age of 94. Because of Soviet Union's communist system, he never made any money for creating the AK-47. Today, Russia produces fifth-generation Kalashnikovs called the AK-12 and AK-15.
Well, in war-struck Kenya, safari doctors offer the only respite for people seeking healthcare facilities. Every month, a voluntary team of both local and foreign medics visit up to 12 villages, while 4 health villages remain isolated from this facility. More in this report.
Every month, the safari doctor's boat sets off from Lamu Island, carrying all the medical equipment needed for a mobile clinic. After more than 2 hours at sea, the team arrives in Kiangwe, a remote village near the Somali border.
The people here are in need of help. The health service is inaccessible to them.
The medical team are volunteers and offer services from vaccinations to maternal health and first aid. Rufia cut his finger with a machete while working in a cornfield. The mobile clinic is his only treatment option.
It's too far, and before you get access to a hospital, it's a problem. There's no money. You need money in order to go see a doctor.
In addition to a lack of transport and health infrastructure, residents of the region must deal with violence from terrorist group Al-Shabaab. A native Kenyan founded Safari Doctors in 2015 to help isolated populations access basic health services.
You have poor infrastructure, and as a result, you have the existence of, the militants, if you want to call it, and the presence of the military. So traveling around becomes tricky. There's some villages that we have to make a last-minute call if we can go to or not.
The mobile clinic travels to 12 remote villages near the Somali border every month, an area plagued with violence. Despite the Kenyan army conducting operations for the past 4 years, they have failed to flush out Al-Shabaab militants.
Well, we'll be back with more news from the world of business and sports right after this short break. Welcome back. Now in business news, South Korea's exports have dropped over 10% in September. This has extended the country's export slump to the 10th consecutive month. South Korea's trade ministry has urged Japan to promptly retract discriminatory and export restrictive measures. The ministry said it expects the country's outbound shipments to rebound early next year. The announcement follows Japan's imposition of curbs on South Korean exports in early July. Last month, Japan approved only 5 shipments of industrial materials from South Korea. The country's outbound shipments dipped below $50 billion last month. Well, it's 26 degrees here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all from me and the team here in Lahore, but we'll be back at the top of the hour with the headlines. Bye-bye.